Well, as you know, today's open seminar's title is the East Timor, the peace building, peace operations and lessons learned from peace building in East Timor or Timor-Leste. Before asking the Professor Hasegawa to make a presentation, I would like to introduce very briefly who is Professor Hasegawa and what he has been doing. Mr. Hasegawa, Professor Hasegawa, is now currently a president of the Global Peacebuilding Association of Japan. And he also has a lot of other titles, but I don't want to mention, because it takes no time. And he is currently also a chair of Japan Council for Global Governance. This is the advisory body for the Committee of the Japanese Diet for World Federalist Movement. So he presided many, the working sessions. And he just now representing all those, working sessions, presented the reform proposal that has been put forward to the Japanese parliamentarians. And it's so interesting. If you have any great interest, I'll let you know, of course, but you can also directly approach to Mr. Hasegawa or Mr. Tanimoto, who is the Secretary General of this parliamentarian movement. And I was one of the, chair. I was one of the chair of the working group on the reform of the United Nations, since I was also ambassador to the United Nations in the past. Professor Hasegawa served with the United Nations since 1969, very, very long time ago. And he served, most of the time in the UNDP, but he also was the, Deputy Executive Coordinator of the United Nations Volunteer Program. And as a deputy head of this mission, he was dealing with the issue of the, the electoral system or election monitoring in Cambodia, and where I met him, and also he was the director of policy and planning of the United Nations peacekeeping operation in Somalia, UNOSOM-2, which is a very famous mission. And he also was the United Nations resident coordinator in Rwanda from 1995 to 96. He finally served as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Asia and the Pacific at the UNDP in New York. And then he was appointed, by the Secretary General as a special representative of the United Nations for Timor-Leste from May 2004 to September 2006. And he was the head of the United Nations mission of support, support in East Timor. And also he was the United Nations office in Timor-Leste and the United Nations mission in Timor-Leste. So he was very much, got involved in the missions of peace building as well as peacekeeping in Timor-Leste. So he has a lot of the experiences, and not only experience, but he has made a lot of decisions on the ground because it was a very important mission. And then he wrote many books on UN peace building, and in English and Japanese. And one of the his recent books is this one, The Spirit of Peace Building. This is a rather thick book. I have it. So if the KGU students would like to read this, please come to me. I would like to lend you because this is so interesting. But it is written, sorry to say, in Japanese. I hope that someday an English version will be coming out. Lots of other English books and papers he has also published. Well, I would like to ask, without any further ado, Professor Hasegawa to make his presentation. He will be talking approximately 30-40 minutes. Okay, so Professor Hasegawa, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Professor Shinyo, for your kind introduction. I will first identify main features of the evolution of UN peacebuilding policies and practices, and then share with you some of the critical lessons that I myself have learned from experience in assisting national and local leaders in Timor-Leste. Let me now put it, hopefully it works. PowerPoint that I was asked. Can you see it? No. Can you see now?
Yes.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Let me just go on to explain to you. Since the end of Cold War in 1990s, we had a change in international environment. As you must have learned already from Professor Shinyo and Mr. Akashi, there was a change in the nature of conflict from international to national. Ethnic conflicts erupted in Africa, Middle East, and Eastern Europe. Rwanda genocide is one. I went immediately after genocide. Concern then was to protect civilians and prevent recurrence of conflict. And purpose of the peace building is to achieve sustainable peace and stability. UN has evolved its policies, structures, and practices. Main approach is that of integrated policies and approaches. You have already heard Boutros Ghali's agenda for peace development, but most importantly, agenda for democracy he published only 1 week before his departure from office. It was an agenda which United States and other perhaps countries did not like it. He wanted the democracy to achieve not only within the country, but in the international community. Second approach that we have adopted in the UN is that of human security. It's very much instigated by UNDP, Japan, Ogata, Amartya Sen, and so forth. Also, Canadian government advanced the R2P, the responsibility to protect. We then went on the part of the United Nations to engage in a reconciliation practice, justice, and how to contain the spoilers. Can you hear me? It's okay? Hello?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay. And by 1998, I was there that the concept, notion of the human rights was accepted by the General Assembly along with the rule of law. And then it took several more years before the General Assembly adopted what we call outcome document in 2005, in which for the first time, all member states, then Russia and China included, agreed to advance liberal democratic governance of principles. And we are very much engaged at that time. I was in Timor-Leste already, in strengthening state building, state institutional capacity building, and we moved forward. And as we learned then afterwards, that the imposition of democratic values and other principles from outside is not answer to achieving sustainable peace and stability. We needed to have national leaders and the people to own the process of peace building. We call it the hybrid peace building with the national ownership. So what it means is this. We strived for integration of the security, humanitarian, and the development concerns, nexus between peace and justice, freedom and the sovereign power in the people. So these are the main features of our doctrines that evolved in the 25 years since the end of Cold War. Let me show you, for that matter, what happened in practice. This is a structure of the United Nations in the 1992 when Mr. Akashi went to Cambodia. You will note here that we have on one hand SRSG, force commanders, police, and other civilian operational staff. They are not connected to the UNDP, UNICEF, UNHCR, and other UN agencies. I was even in Rwanda after the genocide, and I was asked to help strengthen the Rwandan police forces, but I did it as a UNDP. UN peacekeeping operations were not mandated to build the capacity for the national government. So this changed in the subsequent 10 years. And here you see in the 2002, the UN agencies are brought into the total UN structure. And I was one of the first one to become deputy SRSG, resident and humanitarian coordinator. And I performed this function for 2 years before I was promoted to become the SRSG. What it meant is this, that United Nations has to undertake the integration of the peace undertakings on one hand, and development and the humanitarian activities. And then merging two of them, we will have an integrated approach on the governance, DDR, rule of law, justice, human rights, SSR capacity building, electoral process, humanitarian concerns, and so forth. So let me now come to what happened in the post-conflict peace building in Timor-Leste. That lasted from 1999 to 2012, that's 13 years. I will show you, it's in the book, but Timor-Leste is directly south of Japan. In other words, time zone is the same now as it is in Tokyo. It has a population of about 1 million people, 1.3 million people now. When I was there, it was just below 1 million people. 99% of the people are Catholic, with nearly 1% Islamic religion. Timor-Leste was a colony of Portugal for more than 400 years. Since Portuguese went there and colonized the eastern part of the island in 1602. And that lasted for nearly 400 years until when Indonesian armed forces came to occupy the East Timor in 1974. It was a part of overall efforts made by the United States to counter the communist onslaught into the Indochina. Vietnam fell, Cambodia fell, and communists were thought moving into Indonesia. So Kissinger and President Ford basically approved the invasion of Indonesian armed forces to Timor-Leste. That lasted for 24 years. So let me explain to you how this took place. You will see this is shown in my book, but it's a historical development of hybrid peace governance in Timor-Leste. You may see in horizontal line on the left side, it's an illiberal authoritarian regime, and on the right side, it's a liberal democratic governance. And you see on the vertical line that on the top, it's a high level of peace and stability. And on the lower end, it's a war and conflict. So for the 24 years when the Indonesian military occupied Timor-Leste, it was illegitimate and full of conflict. Reportedly,
Go ahead,
sorry.
please.
Can you hear?
Go ahead.
It's okay.
May I ask everybody to make mute because I think there is a noise which strictly very much disturb Mr. Hasegawa. Please make mute.
Okay. So during these 24 years, I understand that the 1/4 of the people were killed. So 1 out of 4 in the family lost their lives. And Sanana Gusmao and his independence fighters, they remained, and I understand from him that at one point, there are only several hundred, 500 or 600 people left fighting. But the day continued and remained in a struggle until when the United Nations went into Timor-Leste in 1999. This was when President Clinton was in New Zealand. And basically, United States and other Security Council members authorized the intervention by the United Nations to carry out the popular consultations. And in that popular consultation, 78% of the people voted for independence, while about a little more than 20% people wanted to remain with Indonesia. For next 2.5 years, our most respected and beloved SRSG, Sergio Dumelo, who was killed in Iraq, but he worked hard on establishing the foundation of the colonial foundation of the governance. He was, interestingly, you see in this chart, he is very much on the left side. He's a very authoritarian because he has the entire power of the executive branch, parliament, and judiciary. In other words, he was the administrator and the president and the chairman of the national parliament and Supreme Court judge. Now, how can he stay in power and have a high peace and stability? This is an interesting question. I think it's acceptance of the people of that ruler. You remember that Plato said 2,500 years ago, it is a benign monarch who cares about the people and who do right thing prevails as a ruler of the country. After the basic foundation was laid, that's when I joined UN peacekeeping mission as a deputy SRSG. That's called AMISET, lasted for 3 years. And here we did a lot of work on capacity building, and we also did the justice by establishing a hybrid court. It is a hybrid court different from ICTR, International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and also International Criminal Court for former Yugoslavia. It's interesting if you are very much specialized in justice issues in the international society, that United Nations spends more than $100 million a year for these two tribunals, each for Rwanda and Yugoslavia. And then we said that it is just too expensive, we cannot do. And we established what we call hybrid court in Sierra Leone, other places, and Timor-Leste. In other words, we have half international judges and half national judges. And we carried out the same exercise at the cost of 1/10, only 10% of what it cost for the tribunal for Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Second thing I did very much engaged is a national capacity building. And this is an institutional building. And to do so, interesting that we achieved is to have the Security Council approve about 100 advisors to carry out the technical work. And we had an advisor from the IMF to operate the banking system. We had the World Bank advisors to map up the development plan. And we had a telecommunication experts and you name it. And the interesting thing is that this is the first time and maybe last time that the Security Council approved the provision of the advisors, and they call it the stability advisors to distinguish it from development advisors. Now, there are very interesting cases here. That idea is for these advisors to develop the skill of the national experts and to leave. But you are too young yet to know, but if you join the United Nations is an institution, it's very difficult to join, but it's more difficult to leave. Everybody wants to stay on because it's a very rewarding work. So some of the stability advisors, they did not want to leave and they want to continue their work. So this is one thing that we have to keep in mind, that our purpose there is to make ourselves redundant. In pursuing a development, we have had one major problem. That is a problem of what languages that they should use. Those leaders, Timorese leaders who are in Portugal and also in other outside of Timor-Leste, Mozambique, they spoke Portuguese. And they wanted to keep the established Portuguese as an official language. So they have a Portuguese and the Tetun as an official national languages, while most of the people spoke Indonesian Bahasa, and the young people wanted to learn English. So this continued to be the problem that they face. The third challenges that we faced during this period was rivalry between the United Nations and the World Bank. World Bank wanted to take charge of all the development aspects, while the government wanted the United Nations to continue to coordinate all the external assistance. And we had sometimes leadership rivalries between the two groups. But these are the minor things compared with the gradual power rivalries between the Prime Minister, Maria Alcatri, and the President, Xanana Gusmao, that emerged during these 4 years. That resulted in security crisis of 2006. And 2006, you will see we went down in terms of stability, down from the peace and stability. We came down to conflict. And that tension lasted until 2008, when there was an assassination attempt at the former President José Ramos Horta, as well as then the Prime Minister Xanana Gusmao. Here, that the leaders of the national leaders learned that they should not engage in armed rivalry. They can compete for political supremacy, but that they should do so without arms. I still remember in the year 2002, when the president asked the prime minister, either prime minister resigns or he will resign. You cannot have a two strong man heading the country. I advised the Prime Minister Maria Alcatri that maybe I think he should step down, telling him that in Japan, we had 4 former prime ministers. So resigning from the prime ministership is not the end in the political career. As it turned out, it's interestingly, the Mr. Maria Alcatri remained as a leader of the Fretilin party, and just from the Timorese ambassador, Isilio, who is here with us, there was a change in the government last week in Timor-Leste. Now the government is taken over by the Fretilin ministers. And there is no doubt that the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, Maria Alcatri, was very much behind that move. So I hope that they can continue to struggle for their power, but do so in a peaceful manner. So what I see here is that main messages, critical lessons that I have learned is the national ownership and the mindset of the national leaders, and also the juxtaposition between the peace and the justice. And let me touch upon this before I finish it. In year 2009, I think Mr. Inoue was there as a head of governance division of AMIT, UN mission. And I was visiting there, and there was this incident of former militia, Matthias Bele, who fled to Indonesia, came back to Timor-Leste. And he was arrested, and he was brought to Delhi for trial. But the Indonesian foreign minister who was attending the celebration ceremony said, look, we have a problem on the other side of the border, that the many Timorese who fled Indonesia, they are very, very agitated because Timorese are putting one of them on a trial. And the Indonesians asked that he be released. Now, then President José Ramos Horta, Prime Minister Gusmao, they contemplated and they decided to let Matthias Bere to be released and sent back to Indonesia. This is a violation of the rule of law and also the justice that the United Nations worked so hard. And the United Nations, we protested these actions taken. And I remember having a dinner at that time with Natasha, who is one of the Supreme Court of Appeal judges. And she was crying, look, we built so much to make a democratic country, but here goes, all the justice is gone. I was advisor, and I'm still advisor to former President Jose Ramos Horta. And I mentioned that it was a wrong thing to do, and he was mad at me, and he said, okay, Hasegawa, you say so, but I listen only to the Security Council, not to the bureaucrats like you. And at that time, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and others, he said he will wait for the judgment to be made by the Security Council. 2 months later, Security Council met, and not one single country referred to the case and criticized, accused Timor-Leste and Indonesia. They are very, very grateful for the two countries to remain in a very cordial relationship and to keep the peace. So it's a lesson learned. What is important? Peace or justice? I think we have to think about another important thing is the power. When the leaders, they acquire more power, then they become too strong and they become corrupt. And here I find it's a mindset that is a problem. You see, often we talk about conflict tree and core problems and the root causes we talk about. I'd like you students to identify what are the root causes. And many people say, yes, in fact, these root causes are corruptions, land problems, ethnic rivalries, prejudices, and so forth, language polarizations. But I learned from the Timorese, in fact, these are the symptom of deeper problems that they have. In fact, the Timorese leaders told me that it is a mindset of the people, the leaders, that is a problem of the conflict. And he says that in fact, it is these deep things that we have, and it's a human problem that we have to think. So what is it that you should keep in mind in extending your support to peace building? I think that important thing is, first, we should not think that we know everything and that we have an answer. I think, as Sun Tzu says in The Art of War, if you know your enemy or partner and know yourself, you can win 100 battles of peace without any loss. And as Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same kind of thinking we had when we created them. We have to be open-minded, and we are ready to find in the dialogue with the local people what can be done to attain the sustainable peace and stability. Thank you very much.